Hiro Boga, welcome to Power Presence Position.
Oh, Eleanor, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. I am really delighted to be talking with you in this context. I mean, we talk weekly otherwise, but yeah.
That's right. Yes, yes. So, and it's so funny during our sessions, there's so much that I want to ask you more about. So this is my chance. This is my chance.
Go for it.
So let's start. You're known as an influential mentor and advisor to female founders who have done pretty epic world-changing work, I would say. And we're going to talk about that, but I want to go back to the beginning. And I would love for you to share with us a little bit about what your growing up in India was like. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and how it ultimately shaped the businesses that you have gone on to build.
Oh, wow.
Just an easy question to start. I figured I'd go easy on you to begin.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So here's the Reader's Digest version of it. Okay. So when I was young, I mean, I grew up in Bombay, which was even then a big city. It's about 6 million people as opposed to close to 22 million now. But it was a big city. And my aunt, my mom's older sister, had a boarding school up in the mountains about 2.5 hours out of Bombay by train. And every weekend, like every Friday, our nanny would come pick us up from school and we'd get on the train and we'd go up there. And all of our holidays, all through the summer, and in India, there are lots of holidays. Like there's 3 weeks in October, there's 2 weeks in December, and it's like holiday city. So I spent a lot of time up there. And when I was up there, it was a really wild place. There was nothing there. My aunt was a real pioneer. When she founded this boarding school, all there was a little village of about 50 people with no electricity and no running water, and everything. All the building materials for this school had to be trucked up from the city. So when I was up there, their school was in session because our holidays didn't coincide. And I was pretty much left to my own devices. And nobody told me what to do or where to go. And I spent all of my time kind of roaming these mountains and jungles and discovering all kinds of things, encountering wild animals. And through that process, I developed such a deep relationship with the devas of that place, with the spirits, the overlighting spirits of that place, with the devas of mountains and rivers and streams and forests and the animals I encountered. And being a child, I didn't have the kind of logical structures that we construct as we go through life that then cut us off from ways of learning and knowing that have primarily to do with resonance and curiosity and devotion. And so my relationships with those non-physical beings developed really quickly and very deeply. And as a result of it, I had this profound sense of myself, not as a singular being, but as an ecology, as part of a much larger ecology. And then of my inner being as an ecosystem also. And that, to me, was the foundation of everything in my life. I mean, it could have taken expression in any one of a number of ways. I think the reason that business called to me was because it gave me that same independence of spirit. I wasn't beholden to anybody else. I didn't have to take anybody else's values into account. I could build a world in my business that was a reflection of the world that I wanted to see in our larger global world. And that was important because, I'd go back to Bombay, and the thing about Bombay is that it still is the commercial capital of India. There are extreme discrepancies in wealth and in opportunity. There's unbelievable poverty and obscene riches, and they're right side by side. We have those discrepancies here too, but they tend to live in opposite ends of any given city or town, and they don't often coincide. Whereas in Bombay, you can be in the richest district in the city, and there will be people sleeping on the sidewalks outside, in children wandering around eating out of garbage. And as a child, I think as children we have this really, I know I did, a really strong sense of justice and injustice, and it horrified me. My aunts used to laugh and tell stories about how when I was really young and they'd take me to the market, and someone could come up begging, and what people in their class, this kind of middle class, would do was ignore them, because if they knew that if they didn't, there'd be a whole crowd of people then coming and begging as well. But I couldn't do that, and I would rail at them. I'd stand there and yell at them, ignoring this person.
I can totally see that.
But I grew up with such a sense of powerlessness in some ways, that there was this. There was on the one hand this real sense of unity and wholeness and the power of wholeness, and the beauty of it and the truth of it, and then coming back into the city and experiencing this extremely stratified society and the kinds of suffering that included, that necessarily entailed. It was built into the structure. And being a child, there wasn't a lot I could do there. So I began, working with the devas of the city, without really knowing what I was doing. When you're a kid, you don't really question, you just kind of go along with what you feel and what shows up. And I started to do that. And I felt like whatever it was that I was going to do with my life, it would have to be part of dissolving this system of stratification, this system where some had more and some had more than they would ever need or could ever use in this lifetime, and others would starve and die early deaths because they couldn't afford food or shelter or education for their kids. Now, my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was a social entrepreneur long before there was such a term. That term was invented in 1980. But he had a factory that manufactured gaskets, which are these parts that go into all machinery, including automobiles and so on. And he started out, he had been very involved in the Indian independence movement. So he started out with a profit sharing scheme for all the people who worked in his factory. And then eventually he gave everybody ownership shares. So it was run kind of like a cooperative. He was not the most successful businessman. He had huge success, but then he had stuff around money, and when he would have a lot of it, he'd give it away and then start all over, and that was his thing. But what it gave me was, again, that understanding that business could be a place in which you create something that will sustain and support everybody who works in it, but also then for me, I mean, because I wasn't going to be manufacturing gaskets, that it could be something that supports and sustains the community that forms within it. So that was part of my imperative. And part of it, the thing about India is that nothing is separate from anything else. Just as poverty and great wealth are right side by side, spirituality and the sacred are in everything. It can take many different forms, but in every business you will see an altar of some sort, and no business will begin a new product line or a new venture without having a ceremony asking for the blessing of the gods, and there are tons of them in Hinduism. So business to me was never separate from spirituality or from soul. And so it wasn't this great tussle to, how can I go into commerce as opposed to social work or, political activism. There have been many different paths that you can take. But this one seemed like a natural fit. It allowed for my own gifts to develop, that I could develop them at my own pace. I could do it through service, which is one of the core values of my own soul. And I wanted in some way to create a world in my business through which people who entered my business could experience that same sense of belonging and purpose and contribution and connection that I had experienced as this very young child going up into the mountains. So this is a very long roundabout way of saying.
It's so riveting, though. It can be long and winding as long as it's riveting. It's amazing, and this idea of in childhood, at your aunt's boarding school, the beginning of the development of this awareness that there's an ecosystem inside you and there's an ecosystem outside too, and these two ecosystems, they impact each other, they work together. Now, one of the terms that you used, and I am certainly familiar with it now, but I know that many people who are listening will not be, is this idea of a deva. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so I call them devas because that's my culture. It's a Sanskrit word that means divine beings. But devas, they're non-physical beings who have a very specific function. There are lots and lots of non-physical beings, but devas have a really specific function. And that is that they are pattern holders. They hold the pattern for the perfect unfolding of the lives in their care. So the deva of a mountain, a specific mountain, there was a mountain range, the Western Ghats, in where I would go to my aunt's boarding school, held the pattern for the whole lifespan of that mountain range. I look outside my window and there is a maple tree out there. The leaves are just turning. There's a deva of all maple trees, wherever they exist in the world, and it holds the pattern for all maple trees and their growth and their development and their ultimate, dissolution. But it's not a fixed or a prescriptive pattern. as you can tell, no two maple trees are alike. No two businesses are alike. No two mountains are alike. There are devas of cities and towns. Any creation, including creations that emerge from our human interventions and creativity. Any creation that serves an evolutionary purpose, that serves a purpose larger than its own kind of life, has a deva, and that deva will develop. So for example, the deva of money began as an exchange of goods and services, in a trade and barter system, and then gradually developed to what it is now. It's not that so devas that emerge out of human activity hold a pattern. The deva of money holds a pattern for the perfect unfolding of money's life on this earth, the soul of money. That pattern becomes distorted by the ways in which we choose to use or abuse or misuse it. We're not always conscious. In fact, most of the time, we're not conscious of the fact that money has its own soul and its own deva and its own pattern and its own reason for being. We center ourselves. We're anthropocentric beings, and we center ourselves and we think about money in all kinds of ways that have nothing to do with the soul of money. But the deva of money holds a pattern that is always a pattern in harmony with wholeness, because devas live in a field of love and they live in the field of wholeness, and they live in the field of unity. So they will always call us to a deeper, more generous, more fulfilling, more meaningful way of creating whatever it is that we're creating when we partner with them. When we recognize. So the devas of our businesses are the same, right? They emerge in some way. This is a little tricky. I think about the deva of Safi media, for example. And I said, as I said earlier, so I was preparing for a session, I was attuning to it and simply saying, I'm here. What would you have me do? What are you concerned with? What would you like to emerge out of this conversation that would help fulfill part of your pattern? So it exists before you ever created Safi Media, right? It is a non-physical being who is invested in human activity and in bringing greater love and wholeness and peace and generosity and fulfillment, those qualities of soul, into the world in the form of a business. It could be in the form of a book. It could be in the form of a nonprofit. It could be in some other form. But because it has a connection with you that may well predate this particular life, your particular life, you may have had a connection with, in fact, you have had a connection with it over other incarnations. And because your gifts and your values and the things that you desire are best fulfilled through business, it approached you, you connected. Even it may not have been conscious, but it would be that tug that says, do this. And then through your partnership, and as you developed Safi Media, the deva starts to take a physical form on this earth, and that physical form is Safi Media. But that physical form is always only part of a much larger ecosystem that includes the whole of its soul, which includes the deva of Safi Media, much of which is not an incarnation.
It's still
us.
just potential.
It's there as potential. It's there as potential, and not all those potentials will ever be realized, because a deva, being non-physical, is not bounded by time and space and gravity and capacity and boundaries and the things that you grapple with as a human person in this partnership. On the other hand, that the deva of Safi media cannot do anything without you on this physical plane. You are the one who can make the decisions. You are the one who has to, who creates this podcast and invites guests and thinks about what conversations you want to have and gathers your community together. And so you do all of that in partnership with the deva of your business. And as you develop Safi Media as a physical entity, the deva of your business also changes. It's not that its pattern, its overall pattern is still held in its field, but it will put its energy and its focus and its powers towards those aspects of its pattern that you are able to bring into form and that you are willing to bring into form, because not everything is right for you. And like any partnership, like a marriage or, a partnership as parent and child, you're two sovereign beings and you work together to create whatever it is that you're creating in your business.
You talked about this idea of incarnation. When you think about the work, and what you teach and what you've written about and really sort of thought about and coached and mentored around this idea of the deva of business and the soul of business, is this something that has its roots in your faith, your spirituality?
Not really. I don't know quite how to answer that. My ancestral lineage is Zoroastrian, which is a religion that is nearing the end of its earthly life. There are only about 125,000 Zoroastrians left on this planet. And there's nothing specifically and I'm no scholar of the religion, there's nothing specifically in those texts that speaks to this question that you're asking. For me, it has come out of those experiences that I talked about as a young child, and then as my own consciousness grew, as I began to have agency in the world, because as a child, you don't have a whole lot of that. I started to act more actively with devas. And I remember when I was 10 years old, I won an international essay contest that was co-sponsored by UNESCO and the Japan-India Friendship Foundation. And the Japanese sponsor of it was Yomiuri Shimbun, which was the largest media outlet in Japan at the time. And my name is Hiroshima. My parents named me Hiroshima. So for years, when I was really young, I would wake up in the night, like with my heart pounding, and I would hear and see all these people, and I didn't know who they were. They were just begging for water, and their flesh was falling off of them in strips, and I was just, so I would work with the devas to help these people, but I had no understanding of what was actually happening. Well, when I won this essay contest, I went as the UNESCO Child Ambassador to Japan, and it was a formal, trip, right? So There were banquets and so on. And then one element of the big element of the trip was we went to Japan. I mean, we went to Hiroshima. And the mayor of Hiroshima had organized this gathering at the Peace Memorial. And I remember flying into the city, and suddenly it was like the deva of Hiroshima was right there. And it just showed me this whole picture of, oh, this is who these people are, and you will learn more about them when you're in this city. And this is my larger purpose for this city. And in fact, the city of Hiroshima, which was the first city on which the atom bomb was dropped, has become kind of an official city of peace. Its whole purpose is peace and global peace. And so it holds peace conferences and so on. And that's when it occurred to me that, oh, there are devas of cities. I mean, I knew it because I was familiar with the deva of Bombay, but I hadn't quite put the pieces together, that, I mean, it's a child, right? So that, oh yeah, there are devas of cities all over the world, and they have different purposes, and their purposes adapt to events, that this horrific genocide happened there. I met survivors. They took me to the atom bomb museum. And this was in 1960. So there was still, the bomb was dropped in 45. There were still people in the hospital who had been children or young people at the time that the bomb was dropped. They took me to the atom bomb museum, where I saw the shadows of people printed on walls from the atomic radiation. So they had these fragments of walls there. And I started to piece together the actual physical history of that place with all these energetic experiences that I had had around it, and then with the overarching vision that the deva of that place had for its life. And that's when I began to kind of develop this much a more nuanced and clearer kind of sense of what questions to ask. It wasn't so much about what answers to find, but what questions could I ask? Because the devas were always there. They were always offering guidance, but they will not interfere with your development in any way, shape, or form. And so until you have the maturity to know what questions to ask, you can't really partner with them, So a lot
I
of
think,
it. Sorry,
yeah,
go
and
ahead.
it's so fascinating to me, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge and make space for people for whom the conversation that I'm having with Hiro right now and what we're talking about may feel, on the one hand, it may feel completely out of left field. Like you might, you might be like, what what am I hearing? On the other hand, if I go back to where you first developed this relationship in the woods, for me, I remember as a kid spending a lot of time in the woods and feeling, I didn't know it was a deva, but I felt that something magical might happen. Like I definitely felt a fairy might come out of somewhere, maybe a gnome. But that was really my imagination. But the feeling, there's magic here. And I think we've all felt it and experienced it so many times in our lives, this sense of something greater, some energy, some knowing, some being, some awareness, something, and you can feel it. And that's what we're talking about. And the possibility that it's not just when you're in the woods, that
Mhm.
this energy, this non-physical energy, actually, many things have it. And you talked about asking the right questions. So again, for those of you, I'm going to ask you to suspend disbelief and just open up to the possibility of this, because it's quite life-changing. And there's so many practical applications. So I want to share something with you here. I haven't told you about this, but I just want to sort of share a practical application of how me using my emerging knowledge of what you're talking about here, just sort of this awakened perception that businesses and social platforms and, communities have souls. And that there's a partnership that can happen. So for a long time, I would feel very conflicted and frustrated about social media, for a lot of different reasons, but mostly because of the distortions that you talked about earlier, like the types of distortions that can happen around money. I believe there's a ton of distortions that can happen around social media as well. But if we think about, I'm going to bring up an example. So the example is Instagram. And so I was feeling conflicted, frustrated, and annoyed, but I was also very aware that there are a few people, a few sort of teachers, really wise people who every now and again, I would see what they were up to on Instagram, and it would be nourishing. That was just pretty much it. There was something nourishing about what they were sharing. And I started to think about Instagram, and I started to think about, well, is there a deva of Instagram? And okay, maybe there probably is. I didn't get to ask you, but I was like, I'm pretty sure there probably is, based on what I'm learning. And so what would happen if I sort of tried to, rather than just go post, if I actually tried to develop maybe a relationship or think about the deva of Instagram? And so I did. I started to like think about it in that way. And what really came through is how, the distortion, for instance, of posting on social, everything has to be perfect. You can show only a part of yourself. So the distortion amplifies the separation from wholeness that so many of us feel. And it's what we react to. We're reacting to the distortion, where the deva is really about the ability to come together, to learn. But that only happens when you bring the fullness of yourself to the platform, the wholeness of yourself to the platform, versus just what you think, people want to see, or the part of yourself that you hold up as the part that's acceptable to see. So there's so many practical applications for this idea of the deva, that even the deva of a business, the deva of a social platform, the deva of a community, the deva of a conference, the deva of a networking group. And what I have noticed is when I start to think about that, and I start to think about stepping into that and thinking about it sort of deva first, it's quite meaningful. It changes. Things are easier. There's less angst. It feels natural. I don't have to think about it too much, because there's sort of a being there.
That's beautiful. It also changes physical reality, I'll tell you a little story. One year, I had gone to India for 6 weeks. It was from November to just after the New Year. And so I'd missed all the kind of Christmas and New Year hoopla here. And I came back, and of course I had, there was no food in my house. Because I'd been gone all that time. So.
That's such a lonely feeling, isn't it? I always find that feeling harrowing, no food in the house.
So I was really jet lagged. And usually before I go anywhere, whether it's the grocery store or the pharmacy or whatever, I will just take a moment and I'll tune into the deva of that place. And because I'm a creature of habit, and I tend to frequent the same places, partly because I have a relationship then with the devas. I went to Costco, but I was jet lagged and I didn't take that moment. And I walked in and I just felt this flood of overwhelm. It was like just a flood of grief. It was like I just wanted to curl up, lie down on the floor, curl up and cry. And I was just watching people, with their carts and heads down, and they were so disconnected from their own bodies and from each other. Nobody was looking at each other. And there was just this atmosphere of sorrow and grief. And I thought, whoa, this is not me. So I left the store. I went back out to my car. I sat down, did what I should have done in the first place, and grounded myself and connected to the deva of Costco. And what it showed me was, this is the post-holiday letdown, right? There are all these expectations that people had that weren't fulfilled. There was all this expenditure, not just of money, but of inner resources, and depletion as a result of it. And because the deva holds in its field everything that is needed for its pattern to unfold, I just, I've been working with them for, I don't know, 60 years now. So I just worked with it to kind of ground the whole store and bring those qualities of love and connection and unity and safety and provision. And then I went back in the store, and the whole energy in the store had changed. People were offering each other places in line. They were chatting with, the floor staff who were kind of folding clothes and doing stuff. And there was just this energy of congeniality. So physical energy changes really quickly. That's a very small instance of it, but it does. And when I first moved here to Vancouver Island, where I now have lived for longer than I've lived anywhere else in the world, I had a school that, so I bought this building that was in a very rundown part of town. A lot of homelessness, a lot of addictions, a lot of mental illness, people kind of wandering around, breaking and entering places and so on. And over the years, as the school kind of developed its own energy field, the whole neighborhood changed. It wasn't so much that it got gentrified. It wasn't that, but there was kindness. There was people were picking up their litter. There was just more community there. And I can't say that I can't draw a direct kind of causative link between the two, but I've seen that happen over and over and over again. So, if you think about your home, you create a container. You were talking about containers. You create a container in your home that holds all of the qualities that allow you to feel belonging and safety and nourishment and support and sustenance. And then people who enter your home enter into that field, and it allows them to be more fully themselves. Your business does that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is, it's very powerful. I wanted to ask you about, because when you think about, I want us to think about what we typically know about business, or what's typically been taught, which is you create systems and processes, you develop KPIs, you hold people accountable to those KPIs, and you action against a plan. Like, if I've ever heard more
What does that
patriarchal
mean?
language, I know.
What does it mean?
Let's action against a plan. And I'm like, what even is that? Let's take action against these metrics. That's how it's so interesting. Like, I've heard that kind of language over and over. Exactly. What does it mean? If it's a plan, don't you want to work with the plan versus taking action against the plan? There's just so much of this out there. And it's no wonder, that so many female entrepreneurs are like, what the hell is this? But what I found as an entrepreneur, especially, so much of of business practices have been created in large corporate entities that are not friendly to women, that women routinely leave in droves in mid-career, right at the height of their earning potential, of their career potential, they leave. Why? because I think they sort of they make that equation of what's required to change this, to make it something I actually want, and versus why not just go out and create my own thing. And they realize that one is the clear winner, And so what I feel so sad about is when we take those same structures, which I believe do not work for everybody. I think they may very well be misguided at their heart. And we start applying them to an entrepreneurial business, which is actually a creation, So I always found that idea of actioning against targets to be.
It sounds like something George Orwell would have dreamed.
Totally. It's so hilarious. And it's like, it's funny. Like it's farcical, but, and so what's the alternative? And I think this idea of the business having a pattern, it has an imprint that's fully malleable, it's responsive, but there is an imprint, first of all, to me, that just feels like, whew, thank God I don't have to personally be responsible for the complete A to Z unfolding of this business. First of all, how could I? I mean, it's going to require a team anyway. But this, so first, I think that pattern, is such a comforting idea. But what I find so fascinating, and we've talked about this, is then what does it mean to plan? If the business has a deva and the deva has a pattern for the unfolding of the business, how does that impact the woman entrepreneur making quote unquote plans? I'd love to hear your take on this, because I think it's fascinating.
And it's one I've been thinking about a lot, especially at this stage of my life. I turned 72 last week, and
happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you. Yes. But as I'm in this sort of last quarter of my life, and my business is too, the pattern that the deva of my business holds changes, right? It changes over the life of a business. What is so important about recognizing that you have a partner in the soul of your business, and that partner holds a pattern for every aspect of the life of your business throughout its life? So, it's an evolving pattern. Is it gives you so much permission not to have to do it right, not to have to plan for the whole life of your business. You can truly trust that once you know how to communicate with the deva of your business, and once you've worked out the kind of relational dynamic between you, because there is a dynamic, it's like I said, it has all the potentials of your business. Most of those potentials will never be realized because they exist in realms outside of this realm of limits and boundaries and capacity and so on. But the ones that you choose, the ones that align with your own gifts, your own genius, your own values, your own desires, and you start to bring them into form, you can always refer back. You only have to know what the next step or the next few steps are. You don't have to know what 5 years from now is going to look like. And it doesn't mean that you don't plan for it, but what you plan for is how you are going to fulfill the purposes of that you and your business deva have arrived at together. So if one of the purposes of Safi Media that you've arrived at together is to give women the skills and the tools and the platform and the community through which they can become successful entrepreneurs, creative entrepreneurs who truly create in their businesses, not just a livelihood, and provision for themselves and their families, but also a way of having an impact in the world that brings meaning and fulfillment to everybody in the world in their business, then that's the core of your planning. You know, how that the form that might take 5 years from now, and you can have a loose plan for it, but you're going to evolve. And part of what happens when you work in partnership with the deva of your business is that evolution happens very fast, much, much faster than, you know, so things can change overnight. Things can change within a week or a month or a year. And if so, you learn how to, it's kind of like, I mean, I've never surfed, but I have friends who do, and it's kind of like that. You're you know, your plan is to get out there into the surf, but how you actually execute it and how you pivot to adapt and respond to the waves is a collaboration. And so when you're planning, you plan in that way. You plan for, you know, my business stands for this. And this is what is happening in the world right now. These are the challenges that my community is facing. And those challenges evolve and they change. And where those challenges meet what you stand for, you and the deva of your business can develop a plan. You know, so in one sense, you're building something for the long term. You're not thinking short term. I know entrepreneurs who feel like they have to create something new every year and, you know, new offerings and to be fresh and innovative and so on. And if that is what your business is here to bring to the world, then that makes sense. But if what your business is here to bring to the world is a foundation that lasts for your community, then you will create the kinds of programs and offers and products and services that all have, they may take slightly different forms, but they all have that as the foundation.
Yeah.
They all.
I remember
Is
you
that
using
making
the
sense?
analogy totally. And I remember you using the analogy of roses, you know, and how it was the fashion for a while to just fertilize the petals and the leaves. But they bloomed beautifully for a short time, but they didn't live because the roots weren't strong and healthy. And I've thought about that. And I want to share something because I think that, you know, I think that I actually started planning this way a little while ago. I think it was part of this shift to doing things a little bit differently that actually, you know, prompted me to reach out to you. But I can remember, so I started doing things differently where it was, I can't even explain it, but it was like things were happening inside this beautiful cave. Cave sounds dark and gloomy, not the dark and gloomy kind of cave, just that cave. Imagine a big fire in it, and it's like something's brewing in there. And so I started doing work on specific parts of my business, and it was very absorbing. It was like really absorbing. And I was really just kind of, you know, my goal was to, you know, focus on one part and then the next part, and the part that felt right to me, the part that felt this is what needs to happen now, and doing the best I could, involving other people and bringing it to a state of completion for now, because things are never totally complete. So that was really how I was working. It was so interesting because the other day I was building the growth stack of my business. And we don't have to get into what that is. It's, don't worry, it's not targets I have to execute against, but I made the growth stack.
Oh, please execute it just so I can see what it looks like.
It looks like a bunch of hot mess. That's what it looks like. So I made the growth stack. And what was so basically the growth stack for my business is these 8 different pieces. They're like 8 different pieces, and they all work together. And I looked at them and I was asking myself, for each of these, like, you know, are they complete? What do they need? And the heart was complete. The heart of the growth stack was totally complete. And it was all these things I'd been sort of just subconsciously or whatever, just working toward. I didn't need my big master plan, but by just doing that next thing, it actually, now I'm looking and I see, there's just this whole other level of clarity. But those pieces, the heart of the business was in place. And it's a powerful thing to trust that. It's terrifying. It's totally terrifying for some people. I don't know if you've experienced that, but what? You mean I can just trust what's on the inside? And to me, that's a whole other conversation. But to me, it's also this part of like the wounded feminine, that part of us that, yes, the wisdom and the power is on the inside. And you can trust it, but we're so often taught not to trust it, and that that's not smart, and that you won't be successful, and that the proper way to do it is to set the KPIs and the targets to action against, to have this incredibly clear vision for the future. But for me, most of the deeply creative, powerful things I've worked on, I've had flashes of clarity, and then they get obscured again. But yet, when you really tune in, you always know the next thing to do.
Yeah, and that's all you need. It's like when you hold the thing about working with the deva of your business is that you're working through resonance. So the pattern that the deva of your business holds for your business is also a pattern that is within you. It may be completely latent within you and much more developed in the deva, but it's there within you. And through that resonance between those patterns, you're always aware of the ecosystem of your business. And the ecosystem of your business, there are just these standard areas. There's your leadership, your team, your vision, your mission, your marketing, your sales, your finances, your legal, right? Your content strategy, but these are all part of an ecosystem. And when you're planning the way you plan for your own life, or you plan for your own child. You're planning with love, and you're planning with a vision for what that life can be, what its potential is, and what it needs right now. Like you're not, when your child is 5 years old, you're not planning for your child to be a world-changing nuclear physicist when she grows up. What you're planning for is, I'm watching her curiosity. I'm watching what she loves. I'm watching where she holds back, and where I need to lend more power and energy, where I need to kind of cool things down. But you do the same with your business. So, what you describe is so intuitively the way that you work in partnership with the deva of your business. You're working within that ecosystem to nurture every aspect of that ecosystem. And I think as women, we know how to do that until we get hammered out of us, because nothing is separate from anything else. We can't just, ignore the fact that our 2-year-old is having a screaming meltdown just because we've got a deadline to meet. We have to hold both and we have to nurture both and we have to nurture ourselves in the process. And so we're accustomed to holding many contradictory needs and desires and aspects in an embrace that naturally allows for flow within that container, and it's a beautiful way to work. It really is.
It is. And, a big part of what I hope people get from the conversation that we're having today is that ability to recognize that in themselves, the ability that we naturally have, and to trust it, and not to feel like it needs to look different or it needs to be, that they need to bring in targets to execute against in order to be successful as a business. Like, we're trying
Every time you say that, I see this image of like a firing squad.
Totally. Completely, right? Like, it's hilarious. And that's how we talk about it. Agreed, because this podcast isn't about upholding a status quo in the business world. Because I think women have spoken very clearly that we don't like it. Like that not, and I am generalizing here because I can. I think we've clearly said it really doesn't work for us that well. We've had decades now, or at least a decade, of women graduating from law schools, outnumbering men, and still not making partner anywhere to the near the same amount. As an example, lawyers, where to contact me if you want to disagree. I'm totally open to hearing it. But I think, it's clear that the status quo business world doesn't work for us. And this podcast isn't about maintaining that. It's about opening up conversations, opening up the gateway to the possibility of a new way of doing things, and really understanding that that's a totally legit way. It's a totally legit way, and you can really create a business that you love, that provides, that more than provides, has a bigger impact. So yeah.
It's also a very effective way, it's practically and effective. It works. It really does.
Yeah. Like, I honestly don't know that if I had set targets to execute against, I could have set my business up for more powerful, sustainable, long-term growth than by doing it the way I did it this year. That, driving in the darkness, where you just see that with your headlights, you just see that the place in front of you, and you can stay focused on that and trust in that, and know that you can drive tremendous, you can travel tremendous distance that way. It's very effective. So I could go on and ask you so many more questions, but I really encourage, people who are listening to, if this conversation has opened up a new possibility for you, I really encourage you to take in Hiro Boga's work at hiroboga.com. You can check out your blog and, resources there. Is there any other place that we should send people?
Well, because your community is an entrepreneurial community, if you go on my website and go on the Deva Alchemy Academy page, you can click on a link to the World of Your Business playbook. You can get it at Amazon or your local bookstore as well. But it's basically a workbook that kind of walks you through different areas of your business. And helps you think through how you want to approach them. It's simple. It costs, I think, $20 or something. And people have found it incredibly valuable at every stage of, like, from startup to, multi-million-dollar businesses. So I'd suggest that. I have a free resources page that has podcast interviews, and we'll put this one on there once it's published. So you can listen to those. You can check out my Facebook business page. It's Hiro Boga Inc., I think, and Instagram. But I would really just encourage you to make space in your life for the things that truly matter to you. Because when you slow down to the speed of presence, where you can truly be present with what you're feeling, with what you know, with what is emerging for you, then the decisions that you make come from your wholeness. And, what I offer can contribute to that, but ultimately, it's supporting you in developing your own container, the containers in your life, the ecosystems that you are creating in your businesses and in your world, because they're not separate from each other.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was lovely.